The following news flash is brought to you by the Lone Star Lowdown, providing your daily bulletins for the commodities market. Today in history, news updates, and the inside scoop into the tides of the alternative. Markets for Friday, the 13th of May, 2016, are currently trading with gold at $1,272.40 an ounce, silver $17.10 an ounce, Texas crude $46.70 a barrel, and Bitcoin is currently sitting at about 457 U.S. currency. Today in history, the year 609, Pope Boniface I turns the Pantheon in Rome into a Catholic church. It was given to the Pope by the Byzantine Emperor Phocas. Pope Boniface then ordered that the church should, quote, be made to the Holy Virgin Mary and to all the martyrs, so that the commemoration of saints would take place henceforth, where not gods but demons were formerly worshipped. The rebranding of the Pantheon, today in history. In recent news, the Obama administration suggested today that public schools across the United States let transgender students use the bathroom in locker rooms that corresponds to their gender identity. The statement issued just days after the Justice Department and North Carolina mutually sued each other over their state law requiring transgender individuals to use a public bathroom that corresponds to the gender on their birth certificate. And though this push from the White House is not legally binding, since this issue has not yet been definitively answered by the courts, schools that refuse to comply could potentially be hit with a civil rights lawsuit from the government and even face a cutoff of federal aid to education. Texas's Lieutenant Governor Republican Dan Patrick said that the state is prepared to forfeit billions rather than to let the Obama administration dictate restroom policy for its 5.2 million students. Many other governors and state legislators have voiced similar concerns, calling this a blatant overreach of executive powers. At BMW's annual shareholder meeting yesterday, BMW chairman of the board, Harold Kruger, detailed BMW's next innovative flagship, iNext, an autonomous, intelligent, lightweight electric car, a combination of BMW's electrified i brand and the Vision Next 100 concept car that debuted with the company's 100th year birthday. This sci-fi ride will be BMW's answer to the growing number of high-tech luxurious electric vehicles, running up as the major challenger to Tesla. The Lone Star Lowdown is currently looking for sponsors. If you have a product or service you'd like to advertise with us, feel free to give me a call at 210-363-2257. It's been Rick Rohde with your Lowdown for May 13th, 2016.
Truth News Radio Australia on the 7th of May 2016. Welcome aboard. Truth News Radio Australia is a homegrown product brought to you by myself, Hereward Fenton, and I try to do something original every week. I try to look at important issues going on in the world and give you my insights, and I try to back up everything I say with some semblance of research and some consideration for what are real sources or what are reliable sources. One thing we often find both with mainstream media and with many alternative media sources is that people tend to stick with that which supports their kind of tribal affiliations in terms of looking for information. Now, I often have my own insights, and I think as everyone does, and as is a common feature of research, I tend to have insights or thoughts, or you might call them hypotheses, and I look for support for the hypothesis. Now, sometimes that can actually lead a person down the wrong path, because if you become too attached to a pet theory, you can just focus on information that supports that to the exclusion of everything else. And indeed, I may be at times guilty of that. But what I'm not guilty of is simply adhering to groupthink positions, which is so common these days, and it is something that is so frustrating and makes it very difficult to get any clarity on almost any topic. My perspective crosses the line constantly between what are normally considered to be left-wing or right-wing positions. These labels are largely meaningless to me. I do have some appreciation for the word libertarian. I respect that concept, although even with libertarianism, I find that a lot of the positions that libertarians take are somewhat ideological and somewhat locked in to a point of view, which doesn't even truly reflect the nature of what a libertarian philosophy would indicate. And typically with that, I often advocate things that some people think would be on the opposite spectrum, on the opposite end of the spectrum to what I have supported in the past. And one such example is Donald Trump. And I'm going to be talking about Donald Trump a fair bit today, but I'm going to be talking about some other issues connected to Trump. But first, I'd like to clarify my statements on Trump. I began looking at Trump around about February of this year. I had not really paid much attention to it. And my initial feeling about Trump was that he was just another one of the players, another puppet, another phony participant in a phony rigged game. And then I looked at some of his more controversial statements, and that also, well, some actually surprised me a little bit because they were so extreme. And then as I saw his popularity was growing, I decided to actually research more and watch some of his speeches. And the more I looked at this man, the more I realised that everything he does breaks the mould of what political aspirants do in America and around the world. He doesn't use a teleprompter. He doesn't follow polls. He doesn't use focus groups. He's extremely individual, extremely maverick. And this is a reality. This is not just spin. I mean, it's been proven from many different angles that this is actually the way he operates. So whatever you might say about him, you can't say that he's just a puppet. He is extremely eccentric in a lot of ways, and including the controversial positions that Trump has taken. They're kind of off the spectrum in terms of acceptability, which is something that the normal political aspirant would never do. For example, his position on torture, where he said, not only should Americans not be rolling back torture, they should be increasing torture, and he'd like to see nastier things being done to terrorists and, bring back waterboarding and more. Now, of course, I think that's an appalling idea, and I'm totally against it. And if that were all there was to Trump, then I would say, well, he's just some sort of nut and probably would never come close to becoming president anyway. But what I've seen with Trump is that he's extremely good at manipulating public opinion. He's doing it on his own, and he is, I think, outsmarting a lot of the people who've tried to shut him down. And his extremely controversial position on torture and on Muslims is one such example where rather than sort of playing the safe game and just staying within the range of acceptable public opinion, he's gone right out on a limb. Now, I don't think Trump can be trusted, and this is a very important point to understand. The statements that Trump is making, especially in the early phase of a presidential campaign, he can't be trusted on any of those. But he's making these statements to mark him out, to draw attention to him. Most of what Trump says is the significant things about what Trump is actually bringing to the table in politics are far different and far more interesting than these one-off, oddball, extreme statements, which get all the attention. Some purportedly sexist things that he's said, such as Hillary Clinton playing the woman's card and a bunch of things like that. And these have drawn so much attention. But they're such trivial parts of Trump's position and so easily discarded, right? I mean, the position on torture, it can't be maintained. It's not going to be maintained. But bear in mind, under most of the presidents in recent decades, torture has been taking place, and it's been doing so covertly, and that is a bad thing, right? So what Trump has done in simply actually making this a public discussion is actually far preferable to the kind of Orwellian playing around with words and meanings that the Bush administration got into. And in the end, Trump said, well, we'll abide by the rule of law. We won't do anything that is actually unlawful. Well, wow. Thank you, Donald Trump, for saying that. That's actually a step forward. But let's get past the torture stuff, right? Let's get into the really important issues. And the most important one, the one I want to focus on most today, is tariffs. And I've done a bit of research and uncovered something very interesting. The history of tariffs in the United States under various governments. And I've got an article here from Wikipedia. Not always my favourite source of information, but often quite valuable. Tariffs in United States history have played important roles in trade policy, political debates, and the nation's economic history. The main goal of the tariff was money to pay the federal budget. Controversy arose over whether manufacturing interests were favoured and consumer interests hurt by high tariffs. The first United States Congress, wanting a straightforward tax that was not too onerous and easy to collect, passed the Tariff Act of 1789. Treasury agents collected the tariff before goods could be landed, and what became the Coast Guard prevented smuggling. Tariffs were the largest, approaching 95% at times, source of federal revenue until the federal income tax began after 1913. Now, let me just repeat that last sentence. Tariffs were the largest source of federal revenue until the federal income tax began after 1913. For well over a century, the federal government was largely financed by tariffs, averaging about 20% on foreign imports. Now, this is extremely important, and it's really important to understand how this has changed over time. I've got a graph here that's also published on the Wikipedia article that shows tariffs from 1784 to the present. And they started off very high, close to 90, 100%, dropped down to about 50% in the middle of the 19th century, and then began steeply declining through into the 20th century, with one brief resurgence of tariffs, which I'll get into in a minute. But then from about 1910 onwards, it just went down, and almost really to zero by the early 1950s. And of course, this coincides with the modern era, the era of globalisation, the era of what they call free trade. Now, all of the presidents, all of the policies of the rulers of the United States going back to the end of World War II have adopted this aggressive free trade policy. There have been some who've tried against it, but they have not had much success. The John Birch Society and some groups like that that tried to make a bit of a resurgence in the 1960s with Barry Goldwater as the presidential candidate, but in the end it didn't succeed. Now, let me just return to the subject of that early period in the 20th century when there was a bit of a jump there in tariffs. This was under a president who is not talked about very much, and I think it's something very important here that conspiracy theorists need to turn their eyes upon. His name was President William McKinley, and he was assassinated. And he was assassinated not long after having brought in changes to policy which would have increased tariffs on foreign imports. And I'll bring you more on that when we come back from the break. You're with Truth News Radio Australia. It's a great pleasure to be with you today. I'll be right back. Don't go away. Men and women of Earth, may I have your attention? This is Hereward Fenton, host of Truth News Radio Australia. You're invited to join the info war as we work to restore truth in media and challenge the dark forces which now dominate mainstream news. I'm calling on you, valued listener, to use your hard-earned dollars to help us smash the globalist empire. Visit truthnews.com.au and subscribe today. back here with Truth News Radio. And I was just about to tell you a little about William McKinley, US Prime Minister, born 1843, died September 14, 1901, the 25th President of the United States. He was assassinated in September 1901, 6 months into his second term. McKinley led the nation to victory in the Spanish-American War and raised protective tariffs to promote American industry and maintained the nation on the gold standard in a rejection of inflationary proposals. Now, as we noted before the break, the federal income tax was brought in only in 1913, and the federal income tax ended up becoming the predominant way that the United States government raises money. And from that point, tariffs just declined and declined and declined. But isn't this interesting? Because, you see, income tax, which we all think of as a sine qua non of a modern democracy, really only has its origin a little over 100 years ago. And guess what? There are other ways of governments funding themselves. And this method of tariffs is one of the ones that worked for a very long period of time. And this is why, folks, that Donald Trump now saying he wants to raise tariffs, this, I believe, is incredibly important. This should be really on the radar of libertarians and people who understand the deceit and the basically the theft that is represented in the taxation system. Should understand that this concept of tariffs is so important, and it gets denigrated with labels like protectionism, as if it's some sort of backward, regressive thing to do, when in fact it is the necessary thing that countries do to protect their sovereignty. And a lot of countries around the world still have high trade tariffs. And guess what? Those are countries that have maintained their sovereignty. But the globalist powers, which are just really giant corporations that operate in many, many different countries, they're not interested in sovereignty. It doesn't help them at all. In fact, it hurts them. Countries that strongly maintain their sovereignty erode the power of mega corporations and banks. So, again, when we see Donald Trump threatening to bring in trade tariffs, you can really understand why the establishment, why the mainstream media, why so many different parts of the apparatus of modern Western democracies have been saying, Donald Trump must be stopped at any cost. Donald Trump must be shut down. Now, let's just have another look at William McKinley. McKinley campaigned heavily in 1896 on the high tariff as a positive solution to depression. Promising protection and prosperity to every economic sector, he won a smashing victory. The Republicans rushed through the Dingley tariff in 1897, boosting rates back to the 50% level. Now, McKinley was ultimately assassinated by an anarchist of Polish descent by the name of Leon Czolgosz. I might be pronouncing that name wrongly. The assassination took place on September 6, 1901, at the Pan American Exposition. Czolgosz went to the exposition armed with a .32 caliber revolver he had purchased 4 days earlier. He approached McKinley, who had been standing in a receiving line inside the Temple of Music, greeting the public for 10 minutes. At 4:07 p.m, Czolgosz reached the front of the line. McKinley extended his hand, and Czolgosz slapped it aside and shot the president in the abdomen twice. Now, the president did not die straight away. He was actually operated on. Then an infection developed in the wound, and he died 8 days later. Now, there is not a lot of conspiracy speculation on the internet about the assassination of McKinley, but the evidence is there that is quite strong that this was a conspiracy, and there are so many indicators to it. Firstly, let's just talk a little about anarchism, because the anarchy or anarchists at that period of time, around about the turn of the 20th century, were involved in a lot of high-profile assassinations around the world. And in many ways, the anarchists of that period served the same function that modern Islamic terrorists served in terms of providing false flag scenarios and indeed reasons for government and military and power bases to increase their powers and also to bolster their support from the general public. And this is by no means a modern idea either. It was understood, there were people thinking about this and writing about it at the time, that indeed anarchists were being used in this way, in a cynical way. And there's a very famous novel written by the giant of English literature, Joseph Conrad, which I strongly recommend to you. It's called The Secret Agent. And it is indeed, it is about a type of a false flag, a terrorist attack, which was actually engineered in the UK. It's a fictional story, but it's a fictional story based on Conrad's understanding of politics and what was going on at that time. And indeed, it is about a false flag terrorist attack, which is actually to be used by the powers that be to denigrate the anarchists, to give them more power, to bolster their impression in the general public's mind. Very interesting novel and a very interesting insight and an early expose on what we've come to understand as false flag terrorism. Now, just getting back to the subject of McKinley, McKinley was involved in the Spanish-American War, and this was heavily pushed by William Randolph Hearst. But McKinley had been less than eager to get involved in it and had been keen to sort of press for more evidence as to why the Maine was sunk. McKinley was doing things with maintaining the gold standard and with his trade tariffs, which were major impediments to what we see now, with the hindsight of 100 years, as being, the essential agendas of globalists. And when I say globalists, what do I mean? I just mean people who are extremely rich and powerful, part of a type of a cabal of interests, where they're basically smashing the concept of sovereignty, creating new types of power for themselves which extend well beyond the borders of nations and kind of make them immune from politics and make them able to be kind of like puppet masters controlling things from far, far above. Now, of course, it's not only the globalist oligarchy which is very concerned about Trump's tariffs. Of course, the Chinese government is quite alarmed, and I've got an article here from The Guardian from May, 5th of May 2006. State media says that Republican attacks China to woo voters. China urged people in the United States to take a rational and objective view of the relationship between the two countries after Donald Trump became the Republican Party's presumptive presidential nominee. And I'll get more into that when we come back from the break. With Truth News Radio Australia, stay with us.
Brain gets blamed for forgetfulness and a host of other postpartum mental states. Does having a baby really turn a new mom's brain into mush? I'm Dr. Catherine Albrecht, and I'll be back in a moment with surprising research on the maternal mind.
Privacy is under attack. When you give up data about yourself, you'll never get it back again. And once your privacy is gone, you'll find your freedoms will start to vanish too. So protect your rights, say no to surveillance, and keep your information to yourself. Privacy, it's worth hanging on to. This message is brought to you by StartPage.com, the private search engine alternative to Google, Yahoo, and Bing. Start over with StartPage.
New moms do indeed experience brain changes, but new research shows they don't lose mental power, they actually get smarter. In the weeks following birth, mothers gain a small but significant amount of gray matter in several areas of the brain, including those associated with reasoning and judgment. The more excited a mom is about her newborn, the more the gray matter increases. Gray matter is the brownish-gray neural tissue in the brain. Generally speaking, more gray matter means higher intelligence and ability. Yes, new moms can sometimes be forgetful, but it's not their brain at fault, say researchers. It's more likely due to the demands of motherhood and sleep deprivation. I'm Dr. Catherine Albrecht for StartPage.com, the world's most private search engine.
Back. You're with Truth News Radio. And today I'm talking about Donald Trump and trade tariffs. Article here from The Guardian. Trump has proposed that tariffs on imported Chinese goods be increased up to 45%. I mean, that's a staggering increase. And it harks back to the McKinley era. We have to go back 120 years to get back to something like that in American history. And he has asserted that China has waged economic war against the United States, taking American jobs. China is the United States' largest trading partner. And I think also vice versa. I think the United States is certainly one of the larger trading partners of China. Asked whether China was worried at the prospect of a Trump presidency after his commanding win in Indiana, Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesman Hong Lei said an election was an internal affair he could not comment on. What needs to be pointed out is that the essence of Sino-US trade and business cooperation is mutually beneficial and win-win, and accords with the interests of both sides. We hope people in all fields can rationally and objectively view this relationship. The official Xinhua news agency said Trump gets them wrong from trade balance to basic economics, citing Western media and academics dismissing his criticisms of trade with China. Now, of course, we can't be sure that Trump will honour his commitments, as I've said. But if he does, if he were to bring in trade tariffs of up to 45% with China, this would really fundamentally change the world. It would change the geopolitical power balance of the entire planet. It would provide an opportunity for income taxes in the United States to be massively lowered. It would seriously dent China's economic power in the world, and with that, China's military power. Although it may provoke China to become more aggressive in a military sense if their economic hegemony were threatened in this way. And that's something we have to be very keenly aware of, that the risks here are quite considerable. But, the risks of maintaining the status quo are pretty bad too. Because what's happening with the way things have been going with the Bushes and the Clintons and Obama and just this left-right duopoly in the way American policy is run, is that China has just been getting stronger and stronger and stronger. And they're a totally tyrannical society. They've got no respect for democracy at all. The economy in the United States has been devastated, and similar things have happened in Australia and all Western nations which have followed in the path of the same policies. The quality of life of average people is dropping, and our own countries have lurched towards authoritarianism and totalitarianism as well. So it's just been like everyone's been losing. The only people that have been gaining from this are the ultra elites, the super rich, the mega corporations owned by the super elites. And I do believe, and this is really a gut feeling, I can't prove it, but I do believe that Trump, although he is close to being in that category, you might say, is not their best buddy. I think he knows these people. I think he's mingled with them. But I think he's actually turning against them, and they will try to shut him down. But will they go for a Kennedy-style or a McKinley-style lone assassin type event? And I should have pointed out that with the assassination of McKinley, indeed it was attributed to the lone assassin, even though there was a lot of evidence that he'd been receiving money from some groups that he was associated with, connected to anarchists. But there were a lot of other anomalies as well with the death and the surgery that was performed on McKinley. But indeed, the lone assassin myth worked in that instance. It worked with Kennedy. And it's worked many times in the past. Of course, Gandhi was bumped off by a lone assassin, a disgruntled Hindu. Yitzhak Rabin, former Prime Minister of Israel, was assassinated by a disgruntled Zionist. And of course, on the face of it, yes, these people do commit these crimes. But then when you look into it, you see power groups who had so much to gain from this taking place, and you see that these people could be co-opted. People who have extremist views who are often mentally unstable, can be co-opted and used simply as tools of these types of power interests. So, again, returning to Trump, yes, it's possible that something like this could occur, but I suspect that won't happen, because I think that it's now reached a point where it's beyond that. I think that the population, the patriot element in the United States, who are heavily armed, and I think a lot of them are behind Trump, simply would not tolerate another false flag assassination. Things have really moved on since 1963 when Kennedy was assassinated, particularly in the last 20 years with the explosion of information via the internet. Many people are much better educated. Of course, most people are still completely brainwashed, couch potatoes, just watching television. That's still the case. Perhaps even more brainwashed than before. But a sizable proportion of our population has become educated, and I probably count myself as one. I learned so much from having access to all the information that is freely out there on the internet to fill in my education, to help me learn about the world. You can't undo that. That's taken place over the last 20 years, not a long period of time. And people know now that they've been tricked. The people know that they've been tricked about 9/11. They don't talk about it very much, but there is a general sense among even the most average people that we were hoodwinked on 9/11. And of course, almost everyone knows that the Kennedy assassination was a conspiracy. So if an attempt were made to eliminate Trump using this hackneyed old tactic of the lone assassin, I just don't think it would wash. But there are a lot of other ways to eliminate someone. Of course, the man could have an accident, he could have a heart attack. That can also be done, and it's harder to prove one way or the other. He is 69. So really, there are an endless range of ways in which these people could do something to prevent Trump from taking power. And of course, in the event that Trump does get in and does actually do what he says he's going to do, there will be huge changes in our world, some of which could be unpleasant in the short term. And I think we have to be willing to accept that in order for things to get better, they are going to have to get worse. There is risk involved, but for me, I always feel that the risk is worth taking rather than just sinking in like a frog in a pot, of water that's getting hotter and hotter and not doing anything about it. You have to jump around a bit, maybe get burned a little bit, ultimately have a chance of getting out of the pot rather than doing nothing. When we come back, I'll cover a few more other points about Trump. You're with Truth News Radio Australia. Stay with us. I hope you enjoy the show, and do get back to me if you have any insights or disagreements with anything I say.
In terms of creating wars is a mind manipulation technique called problem reaction solution. And it works like this. First of all, you create the problem, but you get someone else to be blamed for it. You then report that problem through the media in the way you want it reported. You get the public to react to your problem by saying something must be done, this can't go on, what are they going to do about it? And at that point... Hi,
welcome back. You're with Truth News Radio Australia. I want to talk now a little about Trump and Israel. Trump's position on Israel has caused a degree of consternation and has led many people to say that he is nothing more than a manipulated puppet. And a recent article appeared on the Daily Mail that actually has a video, which I'll play for you, where he's talking about Israel. And this is in a recent interview. This is actually an exclusive interview that he did with the dailymail.com. He said that Israel should continue building West Bank settlements. Now, let me just play to you a little of that video clip, and I'll give you a few comments on it. Here we go.
I think Israel they really have to keep going. They have to keep moving forward. I'd love to negotiate peace. I think that to me is the all-time negotiation, because if you're talking about a tough negotiation, when somebody says, what's the toughest negotiation? I would say between Israel and the Palestinians would be the toughest. We'll see what happens. But no, I don't think there should be a pause. Look, missiles were launched into Israel, and Israel, I think, never was properly treated by our country. I mean, do you know what that is, how devastating that is? We're missiles, and if they miss one with the incredible technology that we have today, fortunately, but you have hundreds and even, I guess, thousands of missiles being launched into Israel. Who would put up with that? Who would stand for it? Who would put up for it? With all of that being said, I would love to see if peace could be negotiated.
Okay, that is a recent statement. Now, what's interesting about Trump?
I think Israel should have.
What's interesting about Trump is that he has said completely different things in the past. For example, only in March, he's quoted as saying that he would make Israel pay for defence aid. But when you think about it, is that actually a different position? Is it a flip-flop position? Or is it just this and this? Article here from the Times of Israel. Trump says he'll make Israel pay for defence aid. A candidate lumps a Jewish state in with other countries that benefit from US security assistance, says that they can pay a big league. He says he believes that Israel should pay for the defence aid it receives. He was asked whether he believed the Israeli government should pay for American defence. I think Israel will do that. There are many countries that can pay, and they can pay big league. Now, I don't think, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think any US presidential candidate has ever suggested that Israel should pay for its own defence needs. I mean, this is an extreme position by any measure. And at the same time as that, in different contexts, he's saying, I'm a huge friend of Israel. Israel is very important to me. I think he uses the word ally, but indeed, he sees Israel as an ally which should pay for its own costs. And when he says that Israel should continue building settlements in the West Bank, he's not saying, hey, we're going to defend you, we're going to come to the rescue if anything bad happens. He's just kind of saying, go on, keep on building them. Don't stop. Don't stop for me. It's actually quite interesting when you analyse what he's saying. But again, I think the man is quite clever because he's actually managed to manipulate public opinion to the extent that a lot of people think that his position is very, very pro-Israel. I don't see it as being particularly pro-Israel at all. The characteristic that stands out most with people like Hillary and of course Obama and the Bushes, is their incredibly wishy-washy stance on Israel. Their incredible sort of careful diplomatic tactfulness on saying anything. I mean, Trump just comes out and says things. He just comes out and says things quite bluntly. And of course, this statement about expecting Israel to pay for its own defences, well, of course, if that were to happen, that really would be the end of Israel. Let's face it, they can't afford to pay for that. Israel's military is way beyond what their tiny GDP can actually support. So if Trump comes good on this, I mean, he may say we love Israel, but, he's not going to defend them. So things are going to change. But indeed, we don't know what will really happen. These are all just guesses based on what, the man or the candidate has said about his intentions. But if you go back to the previous presidential campaign, you look at what Obama was saying. Well, in the last phase of the presidential election, Obama pretty well outlined what he was going to do. And this is what they generally do. They do generally outline what they're going to do. And normally, and most people saw it with Obama, that he was being spun to be something he was not. I mean, his own statements were contradictory to the glorification that he received and the Nobel Prize he received in the very first year of his office, when in fact he didn't have any intention of reducing America's militarism. He increased troop commitments. He just pulled some out of Iraq, stuck more in Afghanistan. He didn't shut down Gitmo. He increased Predator drone strikes. He got heavily involved in the Libyan situation and committed support to toppling the Syrian regime. I mean, this guy is just a total militaristic nightmare for the world. So But all of that was quite clear from what Obama was saying in that early phase before he became president. I think it's very unlikely that Trump will just completely backflip on everything he said. I just don't think, if he were planning to take positions which are more like what Clinton would do or what a Bush would do, then he wouldn't be saying what he's saying now. It just wouldn't work. His popularity would collapse straight away. He's built his whole campaign on a really radical revolutionary change in American foreign policy. And he's woken a lot of people up. He's built that expectation. And again, he won't be able to let people down that easily once he's done that. It's very important to understand. Now, one last topic to cover for today's show, because we are nearly at the end of the hour, is Trump's position on 9/11 and the secret papers which may link 9/11 to Saudi Arabia. Again, Trump really stands out in that he's the only prominent person out there who is calling for this information to be declassified. Defending his, and I'm not going to say prominent person, I mean prominent politician who has a good chance of actually becoming president, Trump says that the secret papers may link 9/11 to Saudi Arabia. Defending his attention-grabbing assertions that the US invasion of Iraq was an enormous mistake facilitated by the Bush administration's misleading of the American people, presidential candidate Donald Trump indirectly referred to 28 classified pages said to link the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia to the 9/11 attacks. Now, this is actually from February of this year. There hasn't been a lot more talk about it, but I expect we'll be hearing more about it again soonish. It will come up again, that's for sure, during the election campaign. And here's a quote from Donald Trump: "It wasn't the Iraqis that knocked down the World Trade Center. We went after Iraq, we decimated the country." But it wasn't the Iraqis. You will find out who really knocked down the World Trade Center, because they have papers that are very secret, and you may find it's the Saudis, okay? But you will find out. Now, of course, nobody knows exactly what's in these redacted pages of the 9/11 Commission. It might just be rubbish, but there's no doubt that the Saudi fingerprints are all over the 9/11 attacks. It's only one part of it. Of course, we know there was an inside job element too. But the suppression of the Saudi involvement is indicative of the inside job. And the fact that Trump even raises this really makes him stand out again. And let's just consider for a moment what would happen if a full public disclosure occurred that showed what the Saudi involvement in 9/11 really was, even if it didn't fully expose the conspiracy, even if it didn't fully expose what happened to Building 7 and WTC-1 and WTC-2. But the collusion of the Saudi government would also rope in the NSA, because you see, the NSA were tracking Saudi nationals in the United States. They helped members of the bin Laden family leave the country secretly immediately after the attacks. The government agencies within the United States did so much to protect Saudis, and the American people are led to believe, well, that's okay, because we didn't want them to be wrongfully accused. And this is what apologists for the Bush administration have said, is that we had to protect the Saudis, and we still have to protect the Saudis because this information in the 9/11 Commission report that's been redacted is actually faulty information. And I think that's what Dick Cheney said. Last point to make, Dick Cheney came out just today and supports Donald Trump. A very, very interesting development. But we are at the end of the hour, and that's our show for this week. I'll be back next week. It's great talking to you. Harold Fenton, Truth News Radio, signing out. See you next week. You with Truth News Radio. Well, in the second hour of today's show, I'm bringing you a very, very interesting interview indeed. Now, I'm returning to some themes that we've discussed quite a bit on the show about the descent into tyranny that we've seen in Australia, and is particularly bad in New South Wales, although I think there's different versions of it going on in all states in Australia, with just increased police powers, increased legislation, preventing people from living their lives in any kind of normal way. I mean, I went through a huge catalogue of outrageous new laws that have been passed in previous shows. And one of the things I discussed in that show was the use of sniffer dogs. And there was a viral photo which went around a few months ago showing that there were sniffer dogs at a public swimming pool in Sydney. And, people don't normally think that this sort of thing will happen. And it's just quite surprising when you see, there are people sort of lounging around a pool on a beautiful afternoon, and there's like 7 guys all dressed in black with big dogs. And it's just so shocking that video actually, that photo actually became viral. Now, recently, another viral video has popped up on Facebook, and I have the man who made it here with me today on the phone. Now, his name's Peter, and he runs a group called Save New South Wales on Facebook. And Peter did a video showing a police operation at Central Station in Sydney. And again, it's the same type of deal. You have a whole lot of policemen, I mean, far more than you would think would be needed, which just seems like a gross waste of public money to start off with. And here they are standing in this big public area of the train station with a couple of dogs. And the dogs are kind of following people along, sniffing them, and just generally making a nuisance of themselves and irritating people. And this is not a rare thing. This is not just a one-off thing. I mean, I've commuted in Sydney over many years. I've caught the trains and I've seen it over and over again. It's very, very common. It's very routine. And it's really, really insidious. Now, when this video went up on Facebook, it attracted a lot of likes and a lot of interest. And then, oddly, within a few days, it started getting massive amounts of kind of hateful responses. And these were people who basically were just often saying very short statements, like the guy who made the video is an idiot and he shouldn't be doing this, it's a waste of time, and then supportive of the police. Now, you normally expect some of that, you expect some of that to be on a response to a video, but this went to the order of thousands and thousands of comments, and it just seemed a little suspicious. It seemed a little bit implausible that many people would respond with such a knee-jerk reaction to what is actually a very reasonable video. It's simply demonstrating what's going on in the train station. There's a short conversation that occurs with the policeman, and the policeman is actually quite rude and says something which is completely inappropriate. And we'll get into that because we'll play some of it for you. But in response to that, the man who made this video has just been the target of massive amounts of hate on the internet. Quite a lot of appreciation too, though, a lot of likes, and a lot of people responding to it, obviously thinking it's very important because it's got thousands of likes, and I think it's had over 1 million views or something at this point. But I'll just now hand you over to the person who made the video to explain more of that. Peter from Save New South Wales, welcome to Truth News Radio.
Yes, g'day, Hereward. I didn't intend to do this. I basically, I live at Gosford, which is about 100 kilometres north of Sydney, and we go down to Sydney about once a month, and always go down by train because the parking is so bad. But at this time I was going down to get myself down to Circular Quay. And so that involves getting off the country platforms which terminate at Central, and then you walk down to the area where the suburban trains go off, and then you hoik onto a suburban train to get yourself around the city circle. So I was doing that, and I was loaded up with luggage, and I just, walking through the station, I saw, nearly a dozen police officers. I lost count, just sitting around with a dog. And when we got down to the suburban trains, they said, they're doing that all the time. So I was just fascinated by it, and I had my camera with me, quite handy. So I just started to record and saw what happened. And it wasn't unexpected that a policeman came over and asked for my ticket and so forth, but I don't have to tell him anything. Would you, if a stranger walked up to you, just because they're police, they're still a stranger, if a stranger walked up to you, would you give them your name and address and tell them what you're doing? I don't think so. So the same applies. And you don't have to tell the police anything unless they're, giving you a move-on order, or you've witnessed a crime, or you've committed a crime, or they're arresting you. So, you don't have to say a thing. And then, of course, you've always got the right to silence, plead the fifth. I reserve the right to say nothing. And so I just took those principles in and was accused of having... I was asked whether I had mental health issues, and from the statement, I respectfully declined to answer. The policeman concluded that I wasn't actually travelling, which was crazy because he'd scanned the ticket, knew where I got on, knew what time I got on, could see that I had luggage with me. It was just showing his weight around generally. But it's more a general thing that it's not this specific incident, which was really, really minor and not an inconvenience at all. But the idea is that this is happening, and it's happening a lot in New South Wales.
Yeah, indeed. And your, the way you carried yourself in that situation, to me, was fine. I've seen a lot of videos that are a little bit aggressive, and I don't always agree with the way some activists do these videos, because sometimes they create more of a problem by being provocative, by being rude. But you were not rude in the slightest. You simply didn't want to answer those questions, as is your right. And I think the policeman was smart enough to know that, because he didn't arrest you or give you a move-on order, because he knew he had no right to do that. So that actually completely vindicates what you did, which flies in the face of all of these people on Facebook, all these trolls on Facebook who are saying that you shouldn't have been there and what you were doing was terrible. Because if really what you were doing was so terrible, then the police would have said so. They didn't. They tried to make you feel uncomfortable, suggesting you had mental health issues, which is completely unprofessional and just outrageous, really. But then again, they had to walk away. They had to let you do the filming. But it would seem, and this is a bit of a conspiracy theory, and we can't prove this, can we? But it would seem that someone has decided to try and get the PR sort of working back on their side by embarking on this campaign. Because the number of comments, I mean, can you just give us a rough analysis of the comments and the likes and just the general responses on this video?
Yeah, it started pretty well straight away, actually, when it went up. I'm pretty sure that a number of the comments are from police. A photo of me that was taken during the video, and you can see the flash from the policeman's camera, it was posted numerous times by various people all over the place, which is fair enough. I mean, I'm in a public place and I can get photographed and so forth, but the object has always been to get the video down, and they just don't want people to see this because it was reasonably good footage. As you said, I didn't abuse or anything, but the object has been to get it down. So first of all, they try if you've got nothing to hide, you've got nothing to worry about, or if you've done nothing wrong, you've got nothing to worry about. So, look, I had done nothing wrong, and I was accused of having mental health issues, so I had something to worry about. So much for that one. Then they started to get aggressive, like, you're a total tool, you're a tosser, you're a moron, blah, blah, blah. The police are there to try and stop terrorism. And, of course, that's wrong too, because later on the police confirmed that it was a drug sniffer dog and not a bomb sniffer dog. And that's probably something on the side. The dogs that police use are trained to either sniff for drugs or they're trained to sniff for explosives, and the dogs don't do both. They're single use. So later on, when another news story went up on another website, the Daily Mail, they contacted the police for comment, and the police confirmed that it was actually a drug sniffer dog. So the contention from the officer that there was a terrorist threat around was just malarkey to try and sort of excuse his actions. The dog there was a drug sniffer dog. So if you think picking up people with a joint or a couple of Ecki tablets in their pocket is going to stop terrorism, well, what a load of rubbish. Anyway, so they got the comments got nasty. I've had a number of death wishes on the comments. There's about 3,000 comments when I last looked last night. You can't keep up with 3,000 comments on a Facebook page. There's just far much. So just people come in, see the video, and then they post a nasty comment and run, and then they don't follow it up. And they actually started to copy and paste previous comments. They might look at 120 comments up, and they'll just cut and paste it and put it in down to another comment.
Well, that's very odd, isn't it?
But see, you've got to put it into perspective. There's 3,000 comments, and not all of them are negative. In fact, there are a number in support, but the majority are negative. 3/4, 2/3 are negative. But even so, you're looking at maybe 2,500 comments that are nasty, coming from a post that has been seen on 1.2 million screens. It's been viewed about 500,000 times, but it's been thrown to about 1.2 million screens. And so that represents 0.25% of people seeing the video. And look, a number of people comment without having watched the video because they just make things up. One guy said I was going to get a plane, which is rubbish. I was going down the Circular Quay. Another guy saying that the policeman didn't give permission to filming, and he says, "I'm not saying that you can't, sir." When I asked him, when I told him that I was going to record it, sort of seems to indicate an implied consent to being videoed, and it's just inaccurate things. The police are looking for terrorists. Well, they're not. They're looking for minor drug offenders walking through Central. It's just the comments are just not sort of significant to me, in the scheme of things.
The overall response to the video is interesting in several ways. I mean, firstly, this is clearly something that many, many people in Australia are concerned about. That's why you've had so many likes. That's why so many people have viewed it. And people do that because they know there's a problem. Because it's not like it's going to be something new they've never heard of. They already know about it, but they don't often get a chance to see someone talking about it or to get good coverage of it. That's why there's such interest. Now, there's already a serious PR problem from the government, from the police point of view, because most people don't like this kind of totalitarian style interference in people's lives. But go ahead, yeah.
Yeah, well, we're seeing a lot more of it.
Sorry, we're just going to break. Sorry to cut you off. We're just going to break. We'll be right back. You're with Truth News Radio Australia. Men and women of Earth, may I have your attention? This is Hereward Fenton, host of Truth News Radio Australia. You're invited to join the info war as we work to restore truth in media and challenge the dark forces which now dominate mainstream news. I'm calling on you, valued listener, to use your hard-earned dollars to help us smash the globalist empire. Visit truthnews.com.au and subscribe today. With Truth News Radio Australia, and today my guest is Peter from Save New South Wales. Peter's been involved in a group that's been doing activism work in relation to CSG and also public transport in Newcastle. And we might get into some of that in the interview today, Peter, because your work has obviously drawn attention to you prior to this, and it seems that you're on some kind of a hit list. Is that fair enough to say?
Yeah, it is.
Right.
It is. The main sort of manifestation of this is that if I post something that's a bit aggressive or something that they don't like, there's definitely a reporting force, and I suspect it's been set up by the Young Liberals in New South Wales. Its object is to get posts down, and not every post comes down, but on Facebook, if enough people report a post, Facebook removes it. Facebook doesn't read the post. Facebook doesn't look at the post. But it just balances up the number of people who have seen the post and reacted to it versus the number of reports that it gets for the post. And if you report quickly, when there's been less interaction on the post, it will come down. And so certain key posts that I've put up have come down due to report, and then you get banned for 30 days from Facebook for doing it. So your own profile cannot post for 30 days, which is really inconvenient because you lose messaging facility to your friends. You lose the ability to just post. I went on a holiday during a ban and couldn't post a photo or anything of when I was away onto my own profile. So
that's quite extraordinary. Can I just ask what topics were these posts on that were taken down?
Well, okay, one post that came down was ICAC in 2014.
Yeah.
13 Liberal Party members had to resign because of their statements to ICAC, which were showing that they were receiving money from developers as donations, and in New South Wales, developers are not allowed to make political donations. A couple of members resigned outright from Parliament and left that day. A couple resigned from the party and sat on the crossbenches. There was a federal senator involved, Arthur Sinodinos, who's back in cabinet now. There was the Newcastle Ward Mayor, Jeff McCloy, who happens to run a property development company called the McCloy Group, and he was Lord Mayor of Newcastle and one of the main agitators for getting rid of the railway stations in Newcastle. That's the sort of thing. Now, I actually shared from another page. It wasn't actually a post that I'd done myself on the page that showed the pictures of the people resigning, all 13 of them, with targets on their faces, and a logo of ICAC saying ICAC has these people in their sites. And obviously Facebook thought that was an advocation to, shoot the guys, which it wasn't.
How ridiculous.
It was clearly, it was clearly metaphorically speaking. But that share of that post onto one of my other pages, Save Newcastle, the share of that came down within 6 hours of putting it up, and I copped a ban. Another one was another share. Another page had put up a picture of Hitler and a few of his mates in the war, and they'd written Mike Baird talks to some of his colleagues about the rail, and I put it up and I added, oh my goodness, people are comparing the Baird government to Hitler. And that came down. And the infractions that I'm making are just getting more and more minor. I also got banned for 30 days quite recently because I spoke to a guy in one of the groups that I run and told him that he had the whole group ID wrong. And then that came down. My actions as a moderator in a group ended up getting a 30-day ban. So, I'm convinced that there is a group of people who can go into a particular post or a particular comment and then just report it with as many fake accounts as they can and get it removed. And, of course, they've been trying to do this to the police video at Central. But because it's been seen by 1.2 million screens, that's not going to come down because, you'd need, a third as many people reporting it, and that's just not going to happen. So,
and how many likes does it have?
Oh, good heavens.
A few thousand.
I'm not quite sure. Probably about 4,000 or something. I can have a look, but it would take a bit time. It's something like 4,000 likes.
Yeah.
It's got 3,000 comments. These are just rough figures. 1.2 million screens thrown on, 500,000 views, and it's quite it's certainly the most seen post that I've ever made. I've had a few going up to 250,000 people before, but not 1.2 million. It's just totally unexpected indeed.
Yeah, indeed. So they're not going to get away with trying to have the post taken down because of that.
No, indeed. No, it's something that's been seen so many times. I mean, obviously, not everyone agrees with what everyone says, and, you expect to be negative comments and something. It's been reported 17 times. We get the statistics. You get really very, very detailed statistics on posts made on pages from Facebook, very detailed. It's been reported 17 times. There's been, I think, something like 400 people who have hidden the post so that it doesn't come up in their timeline ever again. And there's been about 300 people who have hidden all posts from the page, Save New South Wales. But in the 1.2 million views, that's not a high percentage. And you get that anyway on posts. Strangely enough, people's rights on Facebook, that's fair enough.
Indeed, yeah. And the thing that really strikes me about this is the fascist nature of the way they're going about suppressing dissent. And it's ironic in that... Apologies for the background noise. Ladies and gentlemen, there's a bit of drilling going on in my building today, but this interview is very important, so I'm just going to push on through it. As I was saying, the subject matter of your video is really about a trend towards fascism in our society. And the response to it from what appears to be government operatives is even more fascist and even darker, because really what they're trying to do is just suppress any dissent. And what they're doing, the tactic they're using is something that's become very, very common today. Of course, it's rampant on Twitter, where they use themes of sort of inappropriateness, people being offended based on sort of the current climate of being intolerant and people becoming offended at the slightest thing. Like, you're putting an image out that wasn't even created by you that had photos with targets on them, and people could claim, I'm afraid, And this type of this tactic has actually become very, very rampant, and it's actually being used on many, many levels in many different areas in society to actually shut down free discussion. I'd like to have your thoughts on that.
Yeah, the feigned indignation that comes up so much, and it's just not genuine, because what people will say behind a keyboard is at total odds to what they would actually tell you if you're in a room with them and they were telling it to your face. I've had death threats, I'm coming in tomorrow and you better watch out, I'm going to rearrange your face. And I've had that a couple of times from people, so I'll wait the next day. And they don't turn up. It's just to try to make you feel uncomfortable. And we've certainly seen it with this post.
Sorry to interrupt. We're just going to break. You're with Truth News Radio Australia. We'll be right back. Very interesting interview today.
With all the immigrants begging to come to America, you'd think people who are born here would be counting their lucky stars. So why then are record numbers of Americans renouncing their U.S. citizenship? I'm Dr. Catherine Albrecht, back with the answer next.
Privacy is under attack. When you give up data about yourself, you'll never get it back again. And once your privacy is gone, you'll find your freedoms will start to vanish too. So protect your rights, say no to surveillance, and keep your information to yourself. Privacy, it's worth hanging on to. This message is brought to you by StartPage.com, the private search engine alternative to Google, Yahoo, and Bing. Start over with StartPage.
Last year, 1,800 Americans living overseas renounced their citizenship, a record number. Do these folks just hate our country? No, but they're fed up with burdensome tax laws. Most countries don't force citizens living abroad to pay federal taxes, but the U.S. does. In fact, since 2004, the government has hit Americans living overseas with steep fines and criminal charges, even forcing them to disclose information on spouses who are foreign nationals. It's high time the U.S. got off the backs of Americans living overseas, and come to think of it, the rest of ours too. I'm Dr. Catherine Albrecht for StartPage.com, the world's most private search engine.
I actually be kidding about chemtrails.
Welcome back. You're with Truth News Radio Australia, and I'm talking today to Peter, who runs a group on Facebook called Save New South Wales, and he's done quite a bit of activism work trying to deal with various problems in our society, in Australia, particularly in New South Wales. And the focus of what we're talking about today is the police sniffer dog operations and this viral video that Peter shot. Now, Peter, would you like to just pick up where you left off there before the break? And there's some other points I think you wanted to raise.
Goodness, where were we before the break?
Yeah. A little confusing. I'll tell you what, let's just jump forward because what I want to do is... Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. Let's speak more generally. People seem to not be able to generalise and look at a specific incident and then sort of see the overall big picture of it, because this operation at Central is just one operation of the about 2 per day that the police are carrying out now on various railway stations and so forth. They just concentrate on this single issue, and it's not that. In New South Wales last month, legislation was passed, which is for the benefit of coal seam gas or fracking companies, and a lot of protests have been made where people lock themselves onto equipment and cause a bit of hassle from the law enforcement point of view of getting them off, and they're taken to court and they may be fined $300 or $400 for entering closed grounds or whatever. But last month legislation was passed that if you obstruct a mining company's operations, the commercial operations, you're subject to a fine of $5,500, or in aggravated cases you can be sent to prison for up to 7 years. Rather than like a $300 or $400 fine, which it previously was. So that went through the Parliament for the benefit of coal seam gas companies, really. It doesn't sort of let the people express their views. If you do, then you can be in big trouble rather than just minor trouble. Earlier on, there was legislation passed about what was called state significant developments. And if a minister, the planning minister, declares a development to be a state significant development, and they do that unilaterally, then you cannot take that development to court. You cannot oppose that in court unless the minister gives permission for the action to go to court. So they protect the developers in this case. So we've got them protecting CSG companies. And look, CSG companies, I remember Santos accidentally released from a holding pond toxic water, and it flowed down and killed hectares of bushland. It was a rainy night one night. The holding pond for the frack water overflowed, and the frack water is full of toxins and heavy metals and whatever. And it ran down the hill, killed huge numbers of trees and whatever, and they were fined something like some ridiculous amount, like $5,000 in the Land Environment Court for doing this. I mean, $5,000 to a big mining company is, you'd spend it on lunch, or a conference or something, and so they get fined. And in fact, I think those fines have been coming down. So, a fracking company gets fined $5,000 for killing hectares or acres, for in America, of land and the vegetation on it, and a protester who wants to express their view against this could get fined more and get sent to jail. And it's crazy. Ever since September 11, the number of rights of the citizens have gradually been taken away. We've had no real terrorist threats in Australia. Man Monis in the Lindt Cafe, was he a terrorist or was he just a nutter? And I would argue the second has been the only sort of event we've got. Because they say, that's because we're preventing them from happening. But, so, I mean, we're just generally losing our rights. The sniffer dogs is another way of bringing the police into people's lives who probably would never have seen them before. It's an anticipation. It's a reversal of the presumption of innocence. Basically, if the dog sits down next to you, the police then have probable cause to search you in public. And it's proven that, say, about 2/3 of sniffer dogs reacting to a person by sitting down next to them are actually false positives, and the person has nothing on them. So in the majority of cases, more often than not, the dog is wrong, and yet police are using this as probable cause to search people. And you turn your pockets out, you open up your bags, you have to, give your name and address and so forth, all in public, with people looking on at railway stations and on trains and whatever. And it's embarrassing for the person involved. It's just... Well,
it's degrading. It's dehumanising.
Humiliating. It's horrible. And why should you have to go through that? Because in most cases, more often than not, the people have got nothing on them and they have done nothing wrong. And so what it is you're having to prove that you're innocent. And the ancient rule of law is you are innocent until proven guilty. But in this case, you're having to prove that you're innocent rather than guilty, and it just flies in the face of modern sort of judicial principles. It's crazy.
It does, and it really needs a concerted campaign. Of course, the problem is there are so many different things and so many different threats to freedom that we could say, well, let's just focus everything on a campaign against the sniffer dogs. But as you say, this is just one of so many inroads on basic freedoms. It's very hard to know how to come at it, isn't it?
Oh, yeah. I mean, the New South Wales government at the moment, with Premier Mike Baird, what he is very interested in is maintaining a squeaky clean profile. He spends a lot of money on social media, so he's down in the trenches with us in the social media, and he puts a lot of feel good videos up. He's got a social media advisor called Tony Story, quite an appropriate name there, Mr. Story, and he's got a story to tell, and it is, I'm a great bloke and I like my people and so forth, but we've had a lot of dealings with Mike Baird on the the issues that I'm involved in, and he just doesn't listen. We're calling for submissions. We're consulting with the community, and you get factors that get thousands of submissions, and 80 to 90% of them are all saying, please don't do what you're going to do.
Yeah.
for instance, council amalgamations. Mike Baird wants to bring the local government areas to about half of what they are. So, next door councils are going to be amalgamated. We've got a very limited time to discuss this, and it's just been presented as a fait accompli. In Newcastle, as I mentioned before, they chopped 3 railway stations off the end of the Newcastle railway line, because that railway line, for people who don't know, runs along the harbour and up to the peninsula where Newcastle beaches are. And the view from the railway line, from the 5th story of a high-rise building is going to be absolutely magnificent, particularly on a nice blue sky day. And, of course, the developers have wanted that land for years. Now, Mike Baird came in New South Wales in March 2011 and then proceeded to stop the trains, and he has, at the moment, ripped out all the railway lines from Newcastle, preparing the land for vacant possession. The coal seam gas elements, where he's approving coal seam gas operations and sort of tilting the balance in favour of them. It's just, there's so many things. The divide and conquer comes in, and as a single person like myself, it's just better to keep up with the issues, let alone actually do anything about it.
Indeed. We're just going to break. You're with Truth News Radio Australia. We've got one more segment coming up. Stay with us. We're talking about tyranny in New South Wales and so many different fronts that we're being squeezed on. I just want to return to the sniffer dog issue again, because it's one that I haven't really had a chance to talk about much on this show, and it's one that's actually bothered me for many years. And I've seen this in Sydney going back 10 years or more. In some suburbs of Sydney, like Newtown, the police are constantly going into pubs, establishments where people are eating and drinking with the dogs. They're sniffing people up. There was one case that got into the news, and I think it was a while ago, it was like 5 or 6 years ago, where one of these operations was being conducted inside a pub, and a man was being strip searched kind of in front of everybody. You're out having a beer, and the guy next to you is being strip searched in public. Now, a lawyer walked up to the man to try and assist him, to offer him a card. The lawyer was punched in the face, knocked backwards, and broke a rib by the policeman, and then the lawyer was charged with obstructing policeman. And this actually led to the lawyer going to court, and the lawyer, of course, was absolved of all charges, but the policeman was not reprimanded, and there was no remuneration. So the lawyer simply was able to avoid a criminal conviction, but the police completely got away with that. And that's just one example. So we're really talking here about something that actually in many cases is quite extreme. Isn't that right, Peter?
Yeah, I remember that story. Yeah. It was horrific. It's so many examples, isn't it? And the police avoided any form of punishment for what they did. Yeah. Because they close ranks around themselves, and they get their stories straight.
Now, in the other case, which the viral photo of the people at I think it was Boy Charlton Pool in Sydney being harassed by sniffer dogs, it turned out that was actually a bomb detection operation. Now, what I find bizarre is why would the police be doing a bomb detection operation at a public swimming pool? It just doesn't make any sense.
Well, perhaps they've had a tip-off or something in that regard. But I mean, just the whole idea of that is crazy. Chlorine is a major component of bombs. Yeah. It's going to be something the bomb dogs are going to sniff for, and you're at a public pool. There's definitely going to be it's going to be hard for them to sniff out other things. So, strange concept indeed.
And it's also wrong. It's also a very flawed strategy. Even if you believe what they say that they're trying to do, you trust that they're actually got our best interests at heart, it's a very flawed strategy. Because if there is someone with a bomb in a crowded place and these police arrive very publicly with their dogs, what are you going to do? If you're some crazy suicide bomber, you're just going to push the button, aren't you? And apparently in Israel, where there's a far more serious threat of terrorism than in Australia, they found that mice are actually more effective at detecting bombs than dogs, and they're actually planning to switch over to use mice. And it's kind of funny to imagine police walking around with a mouse in a cage, in a train station, they wouldn't do it because the dog is sort of a tool. The dog is more effective actually at intimidating people. And so it has an ulterior motive. And then, of course, there's the massive amounts of money that are spent on all these programs for the purpose of what seems to be intimidations and shakedowns.
No, it's a lot of money being spent on these operations for very, very, very little gain. Do terrorists really catch trains? Possibly they're staking a joint out to have a look, but there's enough information already. What you can see on Google Earth is going to be very handy for a terrorist, and you can see probably even better from using Google Earth satellite images and the Street View. And that's available to everyone in the world online. So whether they're actually out having a look at the places, but are they going to be carrying drugs while they're doing it? Are they going to be carrying bomb materials while they're staking the joint out? Well, obviously not. They're not stupid. So they're just out at a railway station taking photos along with hundreds of other people. So it seems strange. For instance, a story that I was told by a friend was that she's got two children. One's a boy and one's a girl, and they both commute to Sydney. Now, the girl's got brown hair and blue eyes and butter wouldn't melt in her mouth, and she's never, ever been stopped by one of these sniff operations. Yet the boy has got long hair, looks a bit like a hippie, and he has been stopped on numerous occasions by these operations. So they're looking at what you look like. So a terrorist is going to do themselves up in a business suit and just walk straight through and not be even stopped. And surely they're going to do that. Surely they're not going to write terrorist on their T-shirt and walk through, which is sort of almost the level of detection that they're getting.
Absolutely. And you were saying earlier that a majority of the sniffing positives are false. I've got an article here from Sydney Morning Herald 2011 where it says a record 80% of sniffer dog searches for drugs resulted in false positives. That was in 2011. 80%.
Yeah, so 80% of the time when the dog does sit down, it's wrong. So, more often than not, the detections are wrong. How can you use that to do anything useful? But they still spend the money on the operations.
Is this just corruption? Is this basically just an example of opportunistic corruption in the guise of law and order? It's just very hard to see any purpose to it. I mean, it's intimidating people is obviously something they get off on some level, but I can't believe that that's the main justification, that they just sort of need to go out and intimidate people, because it's just it's such a pointless activity. I really find it, and I think a lot of people do. They just don't understand why it's happening.
Yeah, is it just to make the citizens comply? It's almost going as far as late 1930s in Germany, where they're saying, "Show me your papers." In order to do something else. It suppresses opposition to the government, and the government is doing, in New South Wales, and federally, is doing a lot of things that we can be upset about. And, of course, if we publicise the things that we don't like, their electoral chances are damaged, so they're trying to just, clamp down on opposition. And this is an example where people who may have spoken out in the past are frightened to speak out now. It also works against them, because people who may have gone to the police with information that's useful to them before might get strip searched or almost strip searched on one of these sniffer operations. Therefore, they're turned against the police and aren't willing to come forward with information that might be useful to the police in the future, because they, are bloody coppers, blah, blah, blah. And then they don't come forward with information. So it works counter to what they're doing in a number of cases. But the idea is just to stifle opposition, and it seems to be achieving that quite well.
And meanwhile, the people just becoming dehumanised. People are just being treated like rubbish. One anecdote that I remember that illustrates the irony of this. I was at a pub with a beer garden, and I was with a friend who had a little dog, just a very little dog that she had on her lap. And the manager came out all very, gruff and officious and said, "Oh, you're not allowed to have dogs in here, it's against the law." And he actually said it's against the law, it's against public health regulations. And as he said that, the police actually arrived with a team of sniffer dogs. And it was just such a ridiculous irony. And I went and I spoke to the manager and I said, "Come on, this is ridiculous." And he said, "Well, we had no choice." He said, we have to allow the police. And I said to him, "Really, do you have to? I mean, it's private property." And he kind of backed off at that point. I left. I didn't want to stay there after that. It was so obnoxious. But the truth is, I believe that the owners of these establishments have entered into some sort of agreement with the police. They must have. Would that be correct?
No, well, look, they've got licences to sell alcohol, and they can be questioned or appealed or whatever. And even if nothing happens, then you've got to go through all the administrative processes of dealing with that, and it costs you time and money. So
it's easy for them just to say, give it the tick. Turn a blind eye.
You just sort of roll over and play dead and let them come in, basically. That's another thing. On the post of the video, you can see people writing messages of support, great job, we're becoming a police state, blah, blah, blah. And then, of course, the person making that comment gets trolled by all the other people. So they're afraid to speak out in support in many cases because they know they'll get pilloried, so they just, move on and don't get involved. And then that, of course, enables more of these draconian operations or the draconian moves to happen, and enables the government to get away with even more. It's just little by little, like the frog being boiled. The civil rights are gradually being taken away from people, and you speak out against that, and, you cop heaps, so to speak.
Yeah, and it's only people like yourself and shows like this where we're trying to make a difference, but we are very, very few and far between. So it's been really excellent talking to you today. We are at the end of the hour, Peter. Thanks so much for what you're doing. I'll try and get in touch with you again sometime. It's been really good talking to you.
No worries at all, Harold. Thanks for covering the issue. It's, as you say, there are not many speaking out against this, and hopefully there won't be too many negative consequences for you as well, because I certainly have it.
Signing off for this week, that's Truth News Radio Australia. We'll be back next week. See you then.